All right. So for this last theory, and actually before talk about the last, sorry, perspective, symbolic interactionism, I want to sort of allude back to the two perspectives we've already looked at, which is structural functionalism and critical perspectives. Both of those perspectives look at the structure of society as a whole and at the role of broad social forces like economics or politics in and the role of those sorts of things in either maintaining stability and harmony within society or in provoking conflict and division and change within society. These perspectives, structural functionalism and critical perspective, both emphasize research at the level of the whole of society or its major institutions or large groups of people. And as a result, we call those macro level analyses because of that really broad, wide angle lens look at society. Macro level theories attempt to explain things like social change, policies that apply to everyone in society, and other large scale trends and patterns in behavior. Now, on the other hand, all sociologists also recognize that societies are composed of individual actors. To understand society, they say we must also understand how these social actors make decisions, how they organize their lives, how they influence and are influenced by one another. This would require more of a micro level analysis, more of a zoom lens focus on some aspect, smaller aspect of social life. And so in this, micro level theories will tend to focus on things like personal motivations or personal self-identity, the body, and or our interactions with one another. And so it's this micro level analysis where we end up with the last group of theories and last perspective, and that is symbolic interactionism. And uh, not the only question, but a really, key question within any theory that falls within symbolic interactionism is trying to understand how the social reality or how social reality is created through the everyday interactions of people, those individual everyday interactions. Now, this is a perspective that was developed by people like George Herbert Mead and others. We'll start with George Herbert Mead in the early 20th century, kind of was when he was working. Mead and others envisioned society as a product of the everyday interactions of people. Society, as we know and experience it, arises as a shared reality created by the interaction of its members with one another. Social life comes into being, social life comes into existence as we attach meaning to everything. Therefore, we construct reality as we define and interpret and attach meaning to our surroundings, everything and everyone within that. So there's a quote by a social thinker, W.I. Thomas, that really nicely illustrates and reflects the symbolic interactionist idea here. And it's this notion that if men define situations as real, they become real in their consequences. So that's the creation of, of reality in that way. We make reality, we make our own reality as we go about our everyday routines. Another way to sort of phrase this, we call this in sociology the definition of the situation. The definition of the situation is the process of defining, what's going on in this moment, what do I need to do, acting on that definition, and then as you act, seeing how others and things are reacting, and then redefining and we're constantly defining the situation. And this is what we do quite intuitively because we need to know what's going on. So because we need to know how we're supposed to act in any given situation. We also need to know what's going on to know what to expect of other people we may be interacting with. And so this process of defining the situation is ongoing. It allows interactions between people to flow smoothly. Um, if a definition of the situation was lacking or absent or not clear, we tend to focus on establishing one that makes sense or is satisfactory to help us, guide us in our ongoing interactions with other people. So I'm going to give you an example here, an actually, a scenario that is meant to illustrate this definition of the situation process and the attaching meaning, but then also the creation of reality through this defining of the situation here. So I'm going to show a picture here. So I want you to imagine, you say you live in town somewhere, and you live in an apartment, and you're leaving your apartment, and you're about to go, maybe let's go for a walk around the block and that sort of thing one day, and you come out of your apartment, and in the back, parking lot of your apartment, there's dumpsters, and one day when you go out for your walk, you come across this scene here. There's a man in one of the dumpsters in your apartment building here. So think about this, if you came across this, what are you thinking? What thoughts are going through your head? How are you making sense of what's going on? What sort of questions are you asking yourself? And we do this, and then what do you do based upon what you're thinking? So in this particular situation, and I'll encourage you pause if you need some time to sort of think this out and sort of, react to this. Pause the video here. But for example, one person coming across this scene might think, oh, this is a homeless person. They're, just this person, they're looking, for, treasures or food or something in, our apartment dumpsters here. And that's the thought that they might have. And then that turns into, if that's the definition of the situation in that person's mind, then they're likely maybe then to ignore this person, just keep on walking. Another person might, what thoughts might go through their head might be something like, oh, it's really odd for a person to be in a dumpster. This is a fellow human being that might be in need. Maybe they accidentally threw out something and they might need some help, finding it. And then, so that's the definition of the situation for that person. And what they do based on that, then maybe they'll offer to help or at least ask the person if they need some help. And so in both those cases, we have two different results and consequences, but they're real in consequence because of the different definitions of the situation here. So sociologists are guided by particularly sociologists guided by that sociological imagination we talked about earlier. They view society as this variety or a mosaic of subjective meanings and definitions of the situation. No one viewpoint, no one interpretation, no one definition of the situation is right and only right. There is a multitude of ways that we can understand our social world. It only matters that a definition of the situation or meanings we attach to people or things, if it's right and it's real to the person having that definition or making that meaning in that way. And so in this way, going back to our example here, I'll just go back here. This is why, asking you the question, what are you thinking when you see something like this? That thinking then informs your behavior and your action and how you're then going to interact with this one individual here. And in this situation, or in any situation, all situations, sorry, in all situations, because we believe there are real differences between the categories we put people into, these perceived differences are real in their consequences. Our interpretation is real in its consequences. So we treat a person, and we'll treat, again, our man in the dumpster here, we treat that person and therefore interact with them based on our interpretation of the situation, and therefore we're constructing reality. So in that first example I gave, a person think, oh, this is just a homeless person looking for some free stuff here. I'm going to ignore them. They create the reality where that person then, is homeless, not only in their mind, that you or the person observing this, but given how you interact with them, you're sending the message to him that you don't think too much about him. Versus the other interpretation, oh, this is someone that needs maybe some help and I might offer some assistance if I can. And that creates a different outcome and a different experience and interaction for you and for him. He's going to get maybe some help, and that's going to create a different reality for him in that situation there. So symbolic interactionists are interested in uncovering all of the factors that influence our interactions with one another, all of the things that we sort of look at and take note of and use to help define the situation. So for instance, in this scenario, again, when I asked you, say you came across this in real life, what are you thinking? What are some of the things that you noticed and took note of in this particular scene, in this setting? For example, you might have looked at the gender of the individual, and who does appear to be male in this case. Might have noticed the clothing that they're wearing. Clothing, is it dirty clothing? Does it look clean? Does it look like expensive clothing or inexpensive clothing? Even the dumpsters, he's in the recycling dumpster, not you can see the label there. That's symbols, and that we know and understand, and that also then goes to define the situation. So he's in the recycling bin, which probably is a little bit cleaner than probably the brown bin on the left there, which is supposedly the garbage bin in that particular case. So taking note of that and thinking that there's significant difference there, again, might help you, further define the situation, which then informs how you interpret what's going on potentially. Similarly, think about this scenario had you encountered this scene, at night versus the daytime, or if you were alone versus with other people. That all is stuff and information you put into that definition of this particular situation. So in all of these things I just noted, his clothing, gender, the sign on the bin that he's in, these are all what we call symbols. We're using symbols and the meaning of these different things and they influence our social interactions. A symbol is anything that meaningfully represents something else. And symbolic interaction occurs when people communicate through the use of symbols. And we use these symbols to help us define the situation and to help us understand what is going on here, what is actually happening here. And in this particular example, and why I was asking all of these questions, it's to illustrate the symbolic interactionist concept of the definition of the situation, which ultimately ends up being an agreement with others about what is going on in a given situation. And then we use this interaction to allow us to coordinate our actions with others. So thinking about, again, our example here and those two scenarios I had, one individual who thinks, oh, this is just a homeless person looking for, some food or just up to no good. I'm going to ignore them. I'm going to walk away. Think about what that person then seeing someone ignore them basically in this particular situation, how that might then inform, how they're feeling and what they do. They're likely not going to, call out for help if they're needing help to the person that's just ignoring them and walking away, versus the person that does actually maybe look at them with compassion or an attempt to, try and understand what's going on here and to engage with the person and get a sense of what's going on from their perspective there. All right, I'll end this. We'll end this part here. I want to. I'll ask you, and I know you can't answer. Is do you want to know the real story of the dumpster guy? Because this is an actual, an actual individual. I got the story of, and this man's name is Roy. I got this picture, an image from uh, Alberta magazine called Alberta Views magazine several years ago, and they had the story. It was actually a cover story called "The Cleaners," which featured a big long interview with Roy and his wife Michelle. And Roy and his wife, they live in Edmonton, or they lived in Edmonton when I got this article, and they were bottle pickers. That's how they earned income and money. They picked bottles together, and Roy's background, he was born in Montreal. He came to Alberta in 1987. He he delivered truck parts for a little while, but he later met Michelle when they were both going through a program called Labor Ready, which was an agency that paid cash for a day's worth of labor at, construction sites or other places, that sort of thing. They initially started bottle picking originally just to supplement their other income. The Labor Ready program and jobs that they got paid fairly well. They got over $8 an hour. This is probably about 20 years ago, but it wasn't enough for them to keep the apartment that they were living in. So they eventually figured out that the taxes and other deductions, they realized that bottles actually paid more than doing these $8 an hour day jobs did. So they still do take odd jobs, or they did, when the article was written. But they basically make bottle picking a virtually full-time job. They claim to make between $20 and $50 a day. They said it used to be higher, but that's what they were averaging when the article was written. And some days, they found themselves walking for, around 15 miles in order to, gather up enough bottles to go and take in for payment. So anyway, so I thought I'd end there. So let's take a look at, again, so this is wrapping up the videos just on the theories or the perspectives here. And as this is remember the key, concepts that you should be getting from both the lecture material and the reading, the online textbook reading. Now, there are going to be some things that the online textbook is going to is going to cover, and I'm not going to, and vice versa. So you'll always refer to this list and try to find information from both sources, but know that sometimes you're not going to cover, or that the lectures are not going to cover everything in the reading. And you have a journal post for this topic. So you actually have two journal post questions for topic one. And let's see. So we have two questions here that these questions are going to be due on March 9th. And the first question is, so now you're going to have to take that current issue or event that you selected to answer question one from journal post number one, and taking that issue, I want you to pick one of the theories that we discussed this week. Either I discussed in lecture videos or in the readings, and see if you can, describe how you feel it would be helpful in understanding that issue or that event, or what sort of questions do you think that theory would encourage you to ask to try and understand that current issue or event in that way. And so you're going to have to use at least one key concept or quote, again, from the online textbook or lecture video in your response to do that. So you can choose from any of the theories, any of the perspectives, for that one. The second question is, I'm asking you, and this is why I made kind of required reading, that connection, that box in the reading on page 1.4 about food consumption. So I want you to read that, and then what I want you to write is, what would you add to that box of information? Let's imagine you're being asked to, add some more content into this online textbook that other students in the future will read. So what would you add to that conversation about food consumption and looking at it from different sociological theories, given your own experiences with or thoughts about food consumption? And I actually want you to add 3 points, and each point can be just a sentence or two, but 3 times. And so I want you to add 1 point, something you would add that, given the things that this structural functionalism looks at and studies, how would you sort of look at food consumption from a structural functionalist perspective? But your particular experience. And then the same thing for critical theories, and then the same for symbolic interactionism. So those are the 2 questions there. As always, if you have questions, send me a message in Brightspace, an email message. You can post a question on the discussion board, or you can email me to my RDP email address. And there was something else I was going to say there, but I have drawn a complete blank. So we'll leave the video there now.